Okay, it is 2 o'clock. It is time to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So if you're just joining us, thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to learn more about SharePoint and OneDrive. So today we're going to obviously be talking about an introduction to both of these Microsoft products. They're very related with one another. It can get a little confusing. So we're going to dive into some of those things and help kind of break it apart so there's a clear understanding of some of those basics. So today's topic. Oh, yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you just make sure we're recording?
Oh, yep, it looks like it is recording. Sophie, I believe, is handling that. I do see the little red light, so thank you. Good call.
Fabulous. I just don't see it on my end, so thank you, and let's go.
Perfect. Okay, great catch. So, and just a heads up, this will be a recorded event, and if for any reason you have to drop off or miss some of it, it'll be available later this week. So we'll be sharing it out to our website and to our YouTube. So a little bit about, I can switch to my next slide. Here we go. Who is SWICKtech? I believe there's a good number of folks joining us today, so there may be a number of you that know about SWICKtech and who we are, and there might be a few of you that don't. So if you already know who we are, sorry to belabor you on this, but we are SWICKtech, and we are out of New Berlin, Wisconsin, right outside of Milwaukee. We were founded in 2004 and have been around for a little while now. And we believe that all companies have the potential to grow when they embrace evolving technology, and an IT team that puts relationships in the future first. We have a hyper-critically focus around cybersecurity. We have been marching down that path for some time now, but it is at the tipping point in the industry where it is critically important. So the lens that we put on before most all things that we do, we put on that cybersecurity lens and the layered approach that we take towards that. Additionally, since we've been in business all the way back in 2004, as just mentioned, we've lost 0 bytes of data for any of the clients we've ever worked with, and that's a lot of data that we protect. So that's a proud accolade for us. It's an important one because we, as managers of IT for a lot of businesses, we have to be good stewards of that data and ensure that you're able to run your business the way that you need to, when you need to. Beyond that, just the other unique kind of thing that we like to call out is that we do have what Net Promoter Score considers to be world-class customer service. We do survey our client base at several intersections throughout their relationship with us, as well as kind of biannually to just getting feedback and have continuous improvement. And those scores are far above industry average for IT. So it's something, again, that we're proud of. We like to take care of people and hope that they then in turn take good care of our clients. Joining us today, as you kind of heard just a second ago, that was the voice of Jennifer Buchholz. She is the CEO, founder, owner, rock star of Excel and Flourish. Jennifer has been doing this stuff for a very long time, and I apologize, Jennifer, because I don't have my notes in front of me. So anything that I don't mention that's critically important, please let me know. I will tell you that if I did have my notes, her accolades run very long. It's about a page of talking about all of the certifications and experience that she has having run her business for this time. I will tell you that you're going to learn a lot today, so I hope you're ready. As we talk about that, some of those takeaways are you're going to be able to walk away from this knowing when you should use SharePoint versus OneDrive. Like I talked about earlier, the differentiating between those two things and how one may help or enable the other and where you separate those things. The seamless integration of cloud storage solutions. We might talk about, the dependency that you may have on a file server on premise or something like that. Maybe that need goes away. Maybe the need for a VPN goes away, things of that nature as we consider the cloud, which is what SharePoint is. Leveraging SharePoint as an intranet. I don't know the need for the folks that are joining us today, but once you see what you can do with that, you may find some needs for it. It's very powerful, very easy to use, and Jennifer has a lot of experience kind of helping a number of organizations, small to large to enterprise, with all of these things. So with that, I think, we can kind of get into, Jennifer has a lot of different things she's going to share with us. So rather than present to you, so to speak, we're going to kind of walk you through some things very practically.
I'd say that about covers it, Eric. Thanks for the kickoff. And the intention here today is to help you guys have some more confidence in what we see in SharePoint. Depending on where you are at in your SharePoint journey, and those of us who've been around a little while, SharePoint used to suck. I'd love to get some nodded heads on that, even though I don't only see Eric's right now. SharePoint used to be just a real pain in the butt kind of tool that became this document repository / document or data dump. And at some point, a lot of people just really wanted to avoid SharePoint because it was not user-friendly, was not well organized. So now that I've made it sound really cool, let me show you what the new, and actually they call it the modern SharePoint. Let me talk to you a little bit about what that experience is. So first of all, one of the key questions that we have is, when do we use the thing? When do we use the thing? So here's the deal. I'll show you. In general, SharePoint is the basis of so many things we're doing in Microsoft 365. So when we talk about SharePoint as a tool, just know that everything that's under Teams and everything that's under OneDrive is actually driven by SharePoint. That doesn't mean you always have to go into SharePoint to access it, of course, but understanding that SharePoint, once you understand how SharePoint works, you're going to apply that concept to all the things. So Eric and I both have some analogies that we would use to talk about when do you use which. And I'll start with one, then I'm going to have Eric chime in. And then I'm certainly, as we go along, please don't hesitate to put any questions or comments you have in the Q&A. We are monitoring that as we go through our time together today. And Eric will jump in and certainly tell me if we have any thoughts that need to be shared in there as we go, so I don't get too distracted.
Very good at interrupting.
I love it. So when I think of when do I use what, my example has to do with, I often had to write HR policy. It's a very exciting time in my career. And so when I'd start writing HR policy, the first thing I'd do is I'd open up a folder in my OneDrive and I'd have a draft of the policy in there, maybe the old policy. I'm also going to do some research. I'm going to look for other sample policies. I'll look for other regulations and things like that. So I have a folder in my OneDrive where it's everything I need to actually have this policy get written. And then I draft it. And from there, I have two options for how to share it to get feedback from those who are interested parties. One, I can actually share my OneDrive folder with the interested parties and invite them to give feedback or share that file. Or if there's a working team and we're all working to develop policies and everybody should see it and have visibility and give input, I would upload that file to Teams. And that's either one, whether we're shared folder in OneDrive or added to Teams, that's where we're going to collaborate on the policy. But eventually that policy is going to have to get finalized and approved and then shared out. It's HR policy, so it has to be shared out with the organization. And the place where we put it when it's a completed policy ready to be published, we publish it to SharePoint. So that's just one example of how we can use all of those different drives for the different purposes. So that said, Eric, why don't you share your example?
Sure. So I think, sorry, I was just reading a message there. So I think your example is pretty good. I mean, anything that you're going to do that's personal, you're going to put in OneDrive. If you're doing like an employee review or something like that, or pay stubs or like annual review, anything. And even if you're like maybe in the marketing department and you're working on a new custom graphic or something like that, that you're not ready for the world to see it, you can take it as far as you want and put it in there. And then you do need to be, like you said, cognizant about when you go to share that, are you sharing it from your OneDrive or do you want to park it somewhere else? So, you know, you can always replicate that over to a team which would be using SharePoint as that engine. So inevitably it would live there and be a little bit more public at that point. So I think hopefully that's an okay example to speak to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So that said, let me start by talking a little bit about SharePoint. So most people are used to looking at SharePoint, and I'm using an example Microsoft 365 tenant for the purposes of our time together today. So nobody's private stuff is getting shared when I start opening all this stuff. most people are used to SharePoint looking something like this. So I want you to just think of for a second, what's the purpose? So the purpose is that SharePoint's really going to allow your teams to manage content, knowledge, and applications to empower teamwork. So if you're a manager of a team, SharePoint is intended to be your home base. It brings all of the collective work of your team together in one location with the idea that you're going to accelerate your productivity and transform your business processes with hopefully maximizing your team's talent and expertise. Now, this is a way to create one-stop shopping for all different parts of departments, no matter how big your organization is. That's actually one of the things that I feel like is a common myth at this point, Eric. And I feel like this is something that with modern SharePoint, the whole feeling around SharePoint has kind of changed. And here's why. Old school, you needed to have SharePoint developers. SharePoint developers who understood the behind the scenes, and truly only enterprise level organizations were really maximizing the value of SharePoint. And when they'd lose a developer, they often were losing kind of some of the functionality. But Eric, you work with small and medium-sized businesses. What are you seeing in terms of the size of organizations that are actually adopting and leveraging SharePoint?
For us, up to companies with 500 seats or maybe a little bit more, all the way down to 15-person teams. So really, and everywhere in between. If you're using Teams quite specifically, that's a whole nother topic, and I know a whole nother webinar. When we've done a lot of those, it's really easy to just spin these things up without no code, no development. You literally just create different folders and teams, and it's just spinning up. So there's some permissions that need to happen, probably through like a sysadmin, to make sure that your team's enabled to go fast and reduce some of that friction to get permissions. It can feel like a little bit of the Wild West as you're kind of creating these things as you go, but then you have this opportunity to kind of come back and see where people naturally went with things and then do what I would call some cleanup. Rather than creating this rigid structure and forcing people down certain paths, it may add too much friction to how people might actually want to work. I hope that makes sense, if you're using, and you could do all this in SharePoint also. I talked about getting rid of that, file server, in the beginning here. If you have a traditional file server and you're used to using things that way, this can feel just like that, except you don't need that physical hardware any longer, and you don't need maybe a VPN to access that stuff. You can just do it from the web and Teams. So it's really changed things, allow people to go a lot faster in actually a more secure manner as well. So I don't know if that answers the question. I could probably go on a little bit longer.
Absolutely. So actually, we just had a question come in as well. And Gary, I saw the question come in. I will give you an example of that as we go through our time together today. So great question. Thank you. So that said, what we want to do is I want to spend some time talking about the documents, right? The file storage part of this. And then we're going to keep getting into what else is possible with SharePoint, because what's happened with SharePoint is it's become so much more than just document storage. But if we don't resolve some of the pain points that we've seen with document storage and how you access your files, whether you're in OneDrive or SharePoint, people are going to just totally blow off the conversation about SharePoint. So I want to take you back for a second and just talk to you through the story of Microsoft 365. I saw the other question come in. I'm not quite ready to answer that, just as a heads up, Eric.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
So here we go on the Office 365 journey. First of all, please keep in mind that most people are still used to the old school desktop applications, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook, maybe OneNote, right? And now Teams that we've added to the scenario, which is great. But behind the scenes in your Microsoft 365 subscription is Office 365 on the web. And I like to point this out because I want people to understand that they work in harmony, and that what all of the applications that you have are going to have some options on the web, and some you might have more options with than you do on the desktop. So that said, to log in, you're always going to go, I'll type it on the screen just so you see it. You're always going to go to office.com. I mean, it's as simple as it can be, office.com, spelled correctly, of course. And you're going to use your login credentials. So that's why we talk about the security. Your email and password is what you use for secure access to all your stuff. So that's the level of security that you have. Now you get to your Office 365 dashboard, and here are some things that how it's laid out. On the left-hand side, you're going to see a variety of applications. You're going to see some recommended items in the middle of the screen, and you're going to see files that you have down below. This is all just, again, it's meant to be more of a dashboard format where you can go and have quick access to your stuff. From here, you can navigate either using the apps on the left-hand side or the waffle in the upper left-hand corner to launch another application. The first one we're going to launch is going to be OneDrive. When you open OneDrive, I have it open in a new window, and this is going to show you all of your OneDrive files. And what's really great for me is that it shows them all easily organized. You know, this should be a very familiar kind of user interface about how our files are organized. You can also use these filters on the left to see your recent files, as well as shared files. And this is going to be important to know as we go down and we talk about file sharing. File sharing, these are going to be a tab here for the files that have been shared with you, as well as a tab for the files shared by you, with you and by you. So either way, all of your shared files are here, and we'll talk about the recycle bin in a bit. Back up to my files. And we're going to go to the button here that says sync. This is your friend. Even though you can always add new things right here, as well as upload files and folders, you're going to see this sync button is what creates all the magic. Because a lot of people that I've worked with have gotten really frustrated by having to go in to do all of their file stuff on the web. When you click the sync button, it connects to your file explorer on your desktop, and it will sync your files, and you're going to get all the notifications about it. You'll also notice in the bottom right-hand corner, it's going to give you the blue cloud, which is your indicator, and you can actually quick access to OneDrive right over here. Where you can see your files, this is saying everything is up to date. You can open your folder, view it online, or view the recycle bin right from here. But you guys, this is the best part. From now, we're able to get into our File Explorer, the same old way we've always been accessing the file.
Yeah,
and you'll
maybe
see
it looks like your S drive or whatever your server might have been named. So now it can live in this area, and you'll need to pay attention a little bit to those icons. You can see the one says, well, that's a bad use of words, OneDrive. And so like, I just want to make sure that it's called out that, you know, that is your OneDrive, not necessarily SharePoint, right? So is there, because we want to make sure we're articulating some of those differences.
You bet. So you're going to see the difference in the icons as we go through that demonstration. So when you're in OneDrive, for the sake of the demonstration right now, it does say Contoso there, which is the sample company. I'll just quickly bring over, because for me, I actually have multiple OneDrives on my own file explorer because I do work for a variety of organizations. And so here, my OneDrive for my company, my OneDrive for another organization, my OneDrive personally, all of those things are synced here. So I know that I can just jump into any of that without having to dig into the log into Office 365 and go grab it there. It's automatically syncing it all for me. So to me, that means that right from here, and actually I'll go into this folder. Right from here, I'm able to see all the things that are going on with the files in this folder. And this is where it's really important that you understand some of the icon use so that you understand where things are being saved. Everything is stored on the cloud. But depending on how you're using these files, I want you to understand where they're being saved. So when there's a status that's a little cloud, and even if you don't use this view, let me just change views for a second. You can go to large icons. You're always going to see an indicator that tells you how that file is being stored. And if you hover over the file, it actually will tell you how it's available. This says available when online. For the sake of our example, I'm going back to this view. So everything with the blue cloud means it's stored on your OneDrive. Guess what? This guy right here, where it has the double arrow, means we were just recently using that and it's syncing up. The little icon of the person next to it means that that's been a shared file. And we have the green check mark, which means it's available on this device. So here's when you need to pay attention because you're going to choose some of these settings. The default setting is always just going to be the cloud. But if I'm going to be jumping on a plane and I don't want to pay for Wi-Fi, I'm going to right-click on the Contoso Electronics sales presentation. Hold on. It was right there and I went too fast.
This really doesn't
and I'm going to click.
It's similar to like Apple Music. Some of the stuff you have to download to your phone, you know. I know a lot of people have iPhones, so it's an interesting comparison to Windows. I normally wouldn't go there. I think a lot of folks are kind of used to that. Same thing with like Pandora music. You sometimes need to download your playlist first.
Exactly. So if you want it available for use offline, what you can do is right click and then select always keep on this device. And it will then do a quick sync and you'll see when it's green that it is available for you to use offline. And you'll notice that when I hover over it, still thinking about things. When I hover over it, come on.
Yeah, you have a lot going on your computer right now.
Yeah, right. It says availability status available when online. All right, so we're going to work with that. Now, if you have, one of the things that I put in my SharePoint is all my video files because they just take up so much space. But if I want to do some editing or things like that, I'll download them, I'll use them, and then when I'm done, it's almost like you're checking them in and out. I'll right click again, and I'll say free up space. And that will just, when it refreshes, it will put it back to cloud only, and it won't take up any storage on this computer. So before I go further, I know we've had some questions coming in. Let's take a quick breath and see what we've got that we should cover right now.
So I've been publishing some through. If there's any that we don't have the expertise to answer on this webinar, we will get those answers. I was just typing to my team. So it'd be something that we can send back out as an FAQ through our additional communication, perhaps, and or a link on our website or something, so we can satisfy some of these answers. You know, if they're relative to what we're talking about, we can grab them. It might not be a terrible idea too. If we want to do Q&A at the end, we can go through a whole bunch and just do Q&A also. I think
sounds good. Well, I'm going to answer Gary's question real quick because his question was showing a single document in all the different places. So let's just go with our Contoso Electronics sales presentation real quick. And right now you're going to see that in my OneDrive, access through File Explorer. But I also can then go back to my Microsoft 365, go back to my OneDrive, and you'll see, I think I was in, of course, I forgot the name of the file now. Let me go back here. I was in the Contoso Electronics subfolder. So I'll go back there, go to my file, Contoso Electronics, and you're going to see that presentation right here. Okay, so it's the same file. It's just in a few different places. Now, it is not common that, well, again, OneDrive is based on SharePoint. And just as another, you know, so I'm not going to open that same file up in SharePoint. But when we say that it's based on SharePoint, it literally is my SharePoint/personal that is the indicator that this is OneDrive. So I believe we have completed that question.
Someone asked, is there a way to FTP files to OneDrive? Their corporate policies will not allow OneDrive sync to their server. If that's too technical, that's one that might have to go to an FAQ.
Yep, and it depends on other corporate policies for the FTP. So yep, that one we're gonna defer.
Okay, I know when you share out from OneDrive, you can add a password to protect it. You can add a time limit. So if I'm sharing outside of my organization, I can say, access to this will no longer be allowed after, what I think it lets you only push up to like 7 days or something. I might be wrong, but those are things that you can see pretty easily if you hit like the 3 little dots to show more options. So someone had asked, is there a way to unshare files?
You bet.
Okay, and you can also share with anyone in your organization or anyone anywhere, but there's some maybe ways that you might have to adhere to depending on your corporate structure.
There's definitely corporate policy around that. There's many different ways to actually share the file, but just as an example, we'll go through it when I'm in the application with the file and I just hit the share button. So we're going to hit share, and this is going to give you the interface for sharing. And you guys, in this case, I strongly encourage you to click all the buttons, because if you don't, you're going to assume that our only option is to share it with anyone with the link and that they can have edit access, which is not true. Once you click that button, and I'll do it again just so you see, it's this, and it doesn't look like it's a button, but click it. You can then select, is it only going to be available for people internal? Is it available for people with existing access, or am I sending it to specific people? So if you're, the challenge is if you send it out to anyone with the link, that can be forwarded and anyone can open it. So consider what kind of security you need on those files. This is where Eric was also saying, and this interface works. One moment. This interface works whether you're on the desktop application, it's the same interface you're going to get.
Or even in the File Explorer that I think you had shared. I believe you can do it.
The File Explorer is a bit of a different interface.
Okay.
And I actually find it clunkier than what we're doing here. But that's where I would go to revoke permission, is in File Explorer. So we'll still talk about that.
Good.
But in here, this is really cool because you're going to say, okay, we're going to give it to specific people, whatever we want. We're going to, actually, I'm going to leave it open more so we have more options, but we can make it view only. So this little button, it says allow editing, but it really says, are we going to do it read write, or are we going to do it read only? And if you revoke the ability to edit, you also can revoke the ability to download the file. That means it's not even copyable. So those, again, you can put really high security settings on some of these files. You also have the option to set expiration dates, and you can add an extra layer of a password. So there's a lot you can do to make sure that this is going to be a very positive sharing experience because you've set it up properly.
If there's some sort of sensitive information you need to send to a very specific individual, this is a great way to do it because you can see that I believe there's a log to see, did they get it? Do they have it? Are they, having that password, making sure it's just that one person, it's going to be a lot better than just sending something through email. Far more.
It really is. So here's the difference though. Let's talk about when would I do a share versus when would I send the copy or the attachment, right? So if I need their feedback on something, I'm going to share it. If there's a lot of sharing going back and forth, I may even create a folder and actually just share the folder. And then that way any files can get added and shared back and forth that way as well. But if it's the end of the conversation, again, if the policy is finalized, but they need, like I'm sending it to my lawyer because they need it for their records, I may not share that file. Instead, I may send them the copy, the old school attachment of it, so they can download it, save it, and keep it for their records. And that's especially helpful to discern depending on if your policies in your organization have expirations built in. One of the customers I was working with recently, they have a 30-day sharing policy. So if they don't access it within the 30 days, that link is no longer valid. And they spend a lot of time trying to do some recovery on that.
It reminds me of the old Jetsons where it's like this, or whatever show that was, that this will self-destruct in however long. Like you will have access at some point. Maybe it was some, I don't know, some silly show as a kid when I was a kid, but think of it that way. And if you've ever used Google Drive or Dropbox, I mean, this stuff all feels very similar. It is similar to a degree. Obviously, this is Microsoft's ecosystem. So it's really nice because you're already working in like a Word doc. And if you need to share with someone, now you can just have them pop in and help you work through something or make updates or, track changes and things of that nature. So it's pretty streamlined. It is really nice. And
part of that just is, when I do that for the first time, especially if I'm doing it with a group, I actually would do the file sharing and ask everybody to work with me together on it while we are on a call, so we can come up with, hey, this is how the file sharing is going to work best. Because sometimes there's a little bit of a lag when you're doing it in desktop applications if you're if you're all in it at the same time. But to answer the question then about unsharing, right? Once you have your sharing activated, and you're going to see that with this little status, the person in the status, you can always come back in and look at how we have our access set up, right? So it's weird because you go under give access to, and then this is actually where you would remove access from. So here are your options when you do that. You can either stop sharing the file completely, or you can go in and change the permissions to add people, remove people, or change the permissions. Depending on how many people you have it shared with, or if you're sure that you've given everybody the right level of access, it may make sense to just stop sharing, period, and have all the permission revoked, and then refresh that with the proper level. What we don't want to see is too much wishy-washy on, on the permissions. But that's what I find the easiest to do here in the File Explorer. So I'm hoping we've gotten those questions answered.
Yeah, I believe we did. And that movie that I was referring to is Mission Impossible. Thank you, Gary.
There we go. There we go.
So when you share a copy, can you automatically make it a PDF without having to save it as a PDF?
Not that I know of.
No, I'm not sure. I know you can save as PDF. You can print as PDF. When you share a copy, can you automatically make it a PDF without having to save it? Yeah, I don't think you could convert right from there that way, to my knowledge.
Agree. And let's go. Gary had another question about the icons. So yes, the icons are the building is if it's SharePoint or Teams, and the cloud is if it's OneDrive. The building is if it's SharePoint or Teams. The cloud is if it's OneDrive. All right, so we've talked about the use case here in OneDrive. We've talked about where you can go find all the cool stuff. Now, let's talk about what this looks like when we're in SharePoint. So I'm going to navigate back to my office.com, and I'm going to jump over to SharePoint. And now this is my SharePoint homepage. I'm going to show you a couple different things in here. So we're going to just start with the file sharing part of this. The place where I would find it most advantageous is whatever department you're a member of, to go into their SharePoint site, and then you can navigate to Documents. And then from Documents, this is going to look very much like what we saw when we were opening OneDrive. We have the option to do our new, we can do our upload, and we have the option to sync. So if you're often grabbing files from your department's SharePoint, or if you need to be uploading files regularly to your department's SharePoint, you certainly can navigate into the web into SharePoint to do it. Otherwise, when you sync it, just like we would do for OneDrive, once the syncing is done, those documents are then under the SharePoint icon for your organization. And here we go. Same type of status updates, right? But what you don't get, and this is, I feel like we have a miss here. What you don't get is an indicator down below that the SharePoint site has synced. It does indicate, when we have issues with our OneDrive, it doesn't for SharePoint. Now, it does continue to do the syncing. I think the only thing that throws it off is if there's maybe a password issue or if you need to do a refresh. It keeps syncing the stuff. But just so you know, like there's no visual indicator down below of that.
So related, while we're here, one of the questions that just came through, and if we miss them, we will come back at the end. But this question was, if they're not seeing the File Explorer on their OneDrive, like we're showing it, how do you set that up or update that? There is a sync setting once you're in SharePoint Online so that it syncs down into your File Explorer. So thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure we show that.
Yep, so this is the key. And so here's the thing, folks. The reason why I'm taking you a little bit slowly to go through these particular steps is because you really only have to do this one time when you want to start syncing. So going into office.com, going into your OneDrive, hitting sync. Going into office.com, going into your SharePoint, hitting sync. Once you've done that, they will appear in your File Explorer. That's the key. So when I go in and do computer setups for organizations, and some people will just press all the buttons and some people won't, and that's fine. But what I do is I'll go through and make sure at every seat they have synced to the key things they need to sync, so they're not worried about, do I go to the web or do I go to my File Explorer? No, just File Explorer is the habit that we've had for, I don't know, as long as File Explorer existed. So that's what I encourage. Changing habits is hard, and then people will stop using it and they'll start saving it to their local PC. Please don't save it to your local PC, right? That was your public service announcement right there. Don't do that.
Yeah, when in doubt, just save it to your OneDrive.
Absolutely.
Because then if for some reason you shut down and hit save or something happens, you're not going to lose all these things. So, yeah.
So when we look at our SharePoint, we're going to have that same type of setup that we had in here with our OneDrive or with our OneDrive in File Explorer. The only thing that's important to remember here is that unless you're the owner of the SharePoint site, you don't have that same ability to share from here, right? So you can only share if it's limited access to the SharePoint site, you can't share some of these documents with somebody who doesn't have access or permission to that. In that case, you'd have to copy it over to your OneDrive and share it from there. We don't need to dig into that hole too much farther, but just be aware of that sharing works differently when you're not the owner. You own everything in your OneDrive, so you have total control over how that stuff is shared. That is not the case with SharePoint. Now, I want to take it one more layer. We're not spending a lot of time on Teams today, but we did mention it. And I will also say that if there is a team that you're an active member of, and those files are something that you're regularly contributing to, and it would be very helpful for you to have available. Right from a Teams channel, I'm going to the channel and I went to the Files tab. Guess what? There's a sync button, my friends, so you can sync right from there. Yeah, we're not trying to hide it on anybody, right? But a lot of people are just afraid to press the button. I understand that. Now, just to make sure that you're getting how this part works, one of the buttons that exists in the Files section of every Teams channel is this option to open in SharePoint. And I'll do that just for the sake of the example of it is indicating in here that this is a team. This little, let's see if I'll make it bigger for you. This little indicator right here says, hey, wait, this stuff is coming from a Microsoft Teams channel. But it's all living in SharePoint. You're just seeing a better interface. Okay, and so here we go. So that said, I just synced from this team, the Mark 8 project team, the digital asset webs file. And so now you're going to see from the Mark 8 project team, the digital assets web stuff synced here. All right, we're going to do a quick check on questions.
No new ones that had come through just yet. I can go back to one that we had missed if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a little longer. I'm going to read it off just so you have it. So you can obviously read the screen too, but that way folks that are watching can get it. Last year we came off of our file server and moved to a full file structure of the server shared drive to SharePoint. Is there a way to make a folder and add the old server files to it? For instance, I would like to make a folder called HR files and connect several folders to the SharePoint that we moved from the server. So that sounds a little bit like a migration. If you sunset that, traditional physical file share folder, that's a mouthful. And now you've created the SharePoint environment that mimics that, and you want to just bring those files over. I believe that it would work that way. There's probably some tooling that you could do, and there's some best practices. I know we've done more of those types of projects that I can count from our team, but I'm not the one pushing the buttons or moving the knobs and dials. I don't know, Jennifer, if that's something you've been exposed to with some of the clients you work with.
Well, so the thing I'm a little bit questioning, and I'm happy to have any more clarification added to the question if you can. So I'm almost hearing like we had our old structure. Now we have our new structure. But I really liked our old structure in a way, or I really just want to have my own file called HR files that connects to some of the places where this new stuff is. That's what I'm kind of reading from that. So if that's the case, I don't think the answer is yes. I'm not going to say the answer is no, but what I'm thinking I'm hearing is that you want to apply something that makes sense in your brain for the organization and for the easy way to find it for yourself and connect it to something that's like this standard on the cloud. I'm going to say no, but what you probably can do instead is finding those folders that have the links that you want and hit copy link. Right, and you're just going to copy the link. So you're not trying to share it out with all these people, but I might then create a OneNote page for myself that becomes like a table of contents or a directory to take me to the things. So if I need HR forms, and if I don't want to navigate out to SharePoint every time to go find those HR forms, I'm going to just copy the link to that file, and then I'm going to jump into OneNote real quick. And I would just, do you see where I'm going with that? I'm not sure if that's the right question.
So yeah, it's I believe there are some best practices around it. There's two different directions that we're talking about. One is if I'm now in the new SharePoint environment, is it going to look the same as what I was used to? But if I'm still a laggard and I'm still behind and I'm in the old server that hasn't been fully deprecated yet, and I'm not able to use that anymore, how am I going to make that jump? So it sounds like what Jennifer's talking about are these links. What you can do is put it all under one folder that's called archived and then you can say everything is moved to SharePoint with that link going to the new kind of hierarchy. So you do want to put out some communication, educate people as to, hey, this change has happened, effective on this date. This will no longer be here. So you now have this time to make sure you're getting everything that you need, or that you're getting used to this new stuff. If you need any help, let IT know, or whatever that looks like. So it is a little bit of a transition. You want to just do like a real hard cutoff and like you're done. Not everyone might be used to that in the organization. So that is a really good question. I hope we hit it from both sides.
Yep, agree. I think, yeah, and one of the comments came in that it would be a folder full of links, and it actually probably wouldn't be a folder because you just can't make a folder of links. You can make a Word document of links. You can make a OneNote full of links. But the essence is, again, like what I like to do is pull up on the problem. The problem is I want the fastest way to find the stuff I need when I need it.
Yeah.
Right.
And to get there. Yep.
Right. So that's what we're trying to solve for in that. And I appreciate that. Now, one of the things that we promised we'd talk about today, though, is like showing you what else is possible in SharePoint. And again, I'm going to just flip back over here. So many people think SharePoint is just something like this. It's just a list of documents, or it's maybe a list of things that aren't documents, right? But modern SharePoint truly has been built with the intention that anyone can build these pages, and many organizations are using these as their intranet. And I'm going to share a couple of reasons why I think this is brilliant for an intranet. And then Eric, if you can share any stories you have from your experience. So here's the thing. Building an intranet can be a very expensive endeavor, and there's a lot of privacy things that happen that you want to make sure, all that stuff is linked properly. You don't want to have duplication, and it can really be a big job for the developers. Where when you have SharePoint, you literally can take it one little step at a time and connect things as they grow. And all of these pieces are actually web parts. So like this is, I think, I don't know, is that the hero area? So here's what happens. When you go in, now you all won't have the ability to edit your company's intranet. I'm just going to tell you right now, that little edit button isn't going to be there for everybody. But very easily, because I have administrative rights on this, I can jump in and say, oh, wait, do I want this here? Do I want this there? Should I move a section? Should I add a section? It literally, you can pull into so many web parts that are automated. You don't have to go, like literally the stock price, right? You can connect all these different things. You just need the imagination of what you might want to see on the pages. And what's important here, well, I'm not going to get into how to do development on this right now. That could get me to a whole different story. But the intention here is that we're not trying to just duplicate these pages that are all documents. Instead, when we go in, you can see that we can get much more visually appealing in how things are done and still have the ability to get into, let's see, corporate and legal. Again, this is all internal. This is not an outside facing website. This is all internal stuff. So Eric, why don't you share a little bit about how you're seeing organizations use this as your intranet?
So it's interesting that I think it may compete, depending on how you do or don't use this, do or do not use OneNote, but it can be an internal resource. So it could be like where you have certain processes listed, or where you like welcome new team member to the company. You know, we're hiring, so we're offering jobs to people internally first. So go here. Here's the pictures from last week's company event from our Brewers game outing, which would be really cold right now. Maybe be bowling. So I know, at least when I think of like the classic version of intranet, it's a lot of internal things that are happening. I think about it as a resource, as a way to navigate things. If you're a help desk company, maybe you have commonly asked questions that are coming through, or relevant questions that are coming through. So if one person answers a question, another person answers the same question, eventually there's a signal that tells us, oh, we're getting this question a lot. Rather than reinventing the wheel every time, let's capture that and give the answer that's going to fix the problem. And now everyone on the team can go to that question, and here's the answer. So, oh, what is this company policy? What are the upcoming, paid holidays for 2022? How do I plan my PTO? Where are links to payroll? I could go on for a long time. There's a number of ways that you can utilize this. Even the things that you talked about, like some of the widgets or gadgets, like stock prices, or what's going on in the market in your industry. What about like company or industry news? So there's probably a lot that you could pack in there. And like you had mentioned, it'd be really expensive to get that developed or have internal development teams doing that stuff. This is a WYSIWYG. It's what you see is what you get. It's pretty easy to manipulate and use if you have someone that's familiar. You probably want someone that's familiar with web, that understands maybe some basic graphic design elements and things like that. But those are some examples that I've heard of. So it can be pretty robust. It really is. There's no limit to some degree as to what it can do for your internal company.
Well, and the reality is, when organizations are thinking about why do I need an intranet, if you have people who are remote, have an intranet for them. Have a place where, and even if it's not that great to get started, again, the more questions you get, the more you're going to realize what content to put out there. Because this is meant to be, think about this. It's one thing to all be going into work, and if you have questions, you ask each other questions. And in bigger organizations, of course, you're going to go to the web, your internal intranet, to ask those questions. But when you're remote and you have those questions, where do you go? And the answer shouldn't first be to a person. It should first be self-service. And intranet allows for the self-service. But to counter your point on graphic design ability, I want to show you the amazing things that can happen in SharePoint without a lot of, let me make it a little bit bigger for everybody, without a lot of resources. So this is free resources from Microsoft. It's called the SharePoint Lookbook, and it's literally intended. It has a tab here for setting up sites for your organization, department, team, community, other problem solving, and schools. And once you click on one of them, it's literally saying, hey, what do you need? Do you need a news site for company and organization news? Cool, let's click that. All right, so on this news site, by the way, does that look somewhat familiar to the page we were just looking at? Gosh, it has that same kind of feel right up here. So it gives you a visual of what the preset looks like. No skills required. You're literally going to import this template. And then it tells you, okay, so it's meant to be an organizational news source. It's going to use your company's theme. There's backgrounds and headers and blah, blah, blah. Here are the web parts that are used. So this is now translating the language of what the programming language is into, oh, you could say, oh, I just want this thing. Oh, that events thing, that's a film strip. And you might go use that somewhere else. And then it talks about where the content is coming from. Literally, a tenant administrator can click add to your tenant so you can deploy that template. To talk about copy, paste, drag, and drop. So that's just one example. Again, we can go back up to all the different examples that are in here, depending on what purpose you have for them. So to me, you guys, this is what makes SharePoint even more exciting, because literally, if some person in your department is like, gosh, I'd really love it if we had an intranet, and you could just say, hey, go check out this lookbook. They all have access to SharePoint. Everybody has access. Let me share my other screen for a second. Everybody has access to this sharing button. Sorry, this SharePoint button, right? And guess what? Right here, you can create a site. Now, you're not going to get all the templates that I showed just by creating the site, but you guys, you can get a lot. So just so you know, you can put somebody who's interested in tech on that job as their role to you just kind of get things started, and then later finesse it even further.
Maybe it's just to help them out, and maybe it's like a water challenge or an exercise challenge, or maybe you do cooking events or whatever it is you're doing in an organization. There could be, small parts of a larger picture to this, or maybe it's a small site that just exists for that one thing that happened that, one time a year where, okay, let's get this thing going because we want to get excited about whatever the activity or event is, and, have some camaraderie around that, or whatever that looks like, or recipes that were shared, or different success stories and things like that. So it is pretty interesting how much you can do. And not everyone in the whole wide world needs to see it. So it doesn't need to go on your website. It could go on your intranet. Yep,
that's exactly right. So again, one of the things that we really wanted to do on this call today was just to make sure, or almost distill the myth, right? We wanted to distill the myth of, SharePoint is really ugly, old, and boring. No, my cat is just annoyed at something right now. You can have SharePoint too. I don't know if you're hearing him in the background, but he's talking. I just don't want you to think that SharePoint is so complex. There's so many layers to it. If all you want is the file storage and document repository, go for it. But if you want to make things more robust, you have the ability to do that as well. And can I throw a trick into this one? Do you mind if I throw a little trick into our conversation today?
So we've learned so much from you on these, and anything that you have for a trick is always valuable for anybody.
Well, so it gets so weird though. There's this new thing, and it's not super new, but it's one of those things that it's so new that a lot of people haven't started playing with it yet. And I want to make sure you understand this new thing. And it's going to be in Outlook, whether you're in Outlook on the web or whether you're in your Outlook desktop application. We're used to making distribution lists, or we would call them a group perhaps in Outlook. And that we would consider to be what basically, you're trying to send emails to that whole set of people. But now there's this new thing, and this new thing is called a group. And it's not the same as a distribution list. So we're going to just quickly make a test group. Creates an email address for the group. And what happens is, let's select the sensitivity. Is it going to let me? For some reason, it's taking a second to spin up here. Let me dig in one other spot. I'd really like you guys to at least see this in play. Nope, wrong button, that one. So we're going to go into people one more time. I'm going to go in to do a new group. And here we go. And I know we only have a few minutes left. So this is like your bonus content right now. We're going to do test group. Creates the email address. We're going to do testing. Here we go. That's all we need to do to set up a group. But what happens when we set up a group is it's actually spinning up a group behind the scenes. And when the group happens, I'm going to add a couple people. When the group happens, this is like an in-between thing between a distribution list and a Microsoft team. And actually, Eric, I'll ask once I show this if anybody in your organization is using this, because what happens when somebody gets invited to this, and I'm hoping the message will show. Do a quick refresh. All right, as I'm doing the refresh, are you guys using this at all, Eric, in your?
If we are, I don't know about it, but
okay.
We have a lot of very technical people on staff that are doing far more than I'm aware of. So
understood. I totally get that. So what that does is, first of all, it would allow me to send a group message to test group, right? That's one part. I don't know why it's taking a second to spin up. That's where it's stuck. But here's what happens when you make something a group rather than a distribution list. It becomes a thing that has a place to share chat and a place to share files, and it's not necessarily a team in Microsoft Teams. So I want you to be aware that this thing exists. You're going to have to make some choices if you want to test it, especially with externals, if that's going to make sense for you. But the reason why it's important is because it's just not the same as a distribution list that you might have used to do in email. And so if you hit create group versus create contact group, that's the difference.
Is there a use case where it would make, like, is there a decision where, oh, it would be better served to use this than a team? Is it like,
yep.
How do you think about it?
So in the reason why this has come up for me recently is I have an organization that basically they do mediation, right? I'm not trying to show my screen right now, thanks. I'm not trying to show any screen, so it should just be me and Eric on screen. So the organization that does mediation, so they want to have a place where all the files can be dropped. Yeah, we're checking on some tech stuff right now. See where we land. So they need a receptacle for all the files to be dropped. And they want to have, again, mediation. So they want to have stuff coming from party A and party B, but because it's discovery, they need to be able to see everything in those files as well. So the challenge is that they don't want to make a team for this, because then they're making a team for every single one that they're doing, and that's not really necessary. Instead, when they create it using this contact group, it automatically sends them a, hey, you're a member of this group. Here's your link to your SharePoint site where you can share your files. Here's a link to a chat. Now, they don't really use a chat, but it creates the shared file location without putting everybody in a team and having to go through team structure. So this is one where it's they want really limited access. They're not going to be using these people in other teams ever. And so they just want them to have access to the files, and it's, yeah, so it's an interesting case, but again, people are starting to click it and then they're saying, wait, I'm not getting the contact list that I wanted, and what's this group thing? Because they're curious.
Sure, that's logical. That makes sense that if it's like a one-time thing or something like that, or people aren't in the ecosystem, or they don't want to go through that process, or if they don't have the right permissions, it could make sense to park people there. That is interesting, and I'm sure there's some literature we could find on Microsoft's website to talk about it more. And obviously, if anybody has questions that they didn't get to ask, or if we didn't cover something you're interested in, or if you want to learn more, please reach out to myself or Jennifer. We'll be happy to provide more information. Some of that information for contact will come out through our email stuff that'll happen after this webinar. So I don't see any new questions that had come through, and we're right at time. So to be respectful of that, we'll go ahead and end the live broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll hear from more of you soon about some of this stuff, and obviously you'll be hearing from SWICKtech. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.